My name is Romain Beaucher. I'm one of the co-founders of Vraiment Vraiment, and it's a design agency based in Paris and Brussels for public policy. And Chloe and the team from the Mail asked me if I would like to be the moderator for this roundtable, which is dedicated to the future of citizenship, or citizenship and the future, as part of Lille World Design Capital. So I'd like to introduce the three speakers and first of all give an introduction. So as citizens, there are so many paradoxes at the moment with the growth of fewer and fewer people voting and people who are less and less interested in politics from a traditional point of view. Trade unions, associations, etc., where the general public can be more involved, are also in a crisis. There's more and more institutionalized consultation, which very often doesn't mean much. It's not very well thought of either when we think of the referendums on Notre-Dame-des-Landes in France recently, or more closely the convention for citizens, which weren't contributed to, and because there's a law called ASAP, which is currently being discussed at the Parliament, and there has been an attempt to reduce the digital part of the consultation as part of the installations. And then there are some older forms of consultation, like the Grand Débat, digital platforms, and we seem to think that the main aim is that organizers can say, okay, we're listening to you, we're consulting you, but afterwards it's very difficult to see what that has led on to or created or allowed people to do. And at the same time, there's a real taste and appetite in the political world of groups and who are quite distanced from this. We think of the yellow jackets or vests. And recently there have been a lot of questions about policies and citizenship, and I think it seems to fit in, therefore, with the question that we're going to be answering this afternoon. And there's almost a metamorphosis in terms of citizenship, in terms of its forms, its use, and that's good because it's also a question of design. And so it really does have a role to play in this cycle as Lille, which is the capital for design. And so in the coming 2 hours, we're going to be looking at how we can engage in preparing for citizenship in the future. And so I'd like us to think about the future, not only the current form, whether it be just to criticize it, but how in the future will we be able to better become involved as citizens. To talk about this, we have 3 speakers that I'd like to introduce. Vanessa Wisnia-Weill, in February you published a book by Seuil, and in this book you defend the fact that invention is there will be 5 fields: consumption, links, intimate links, and citizenship being amongst them. And they're essential if we're going to be emancipated and have freedom for individual. And you, since 2009, you've been working for France Strategy, which is the future strategy department, and you're an expert in social policies. François Jegou is a designer. He founded Strategy Design Scenario, which is a research laboratory on social innovation, public policy innovation, and the way in which we can transition towards sustainable ways of life. And he'll be talking to us about design, haute qualité démocratique, and we'll come back to that later on. And François coordinates the European network of towns within URBACT, and you're a partner of various European research projects as part of H21. And then Clémence, Pène, you are in charge of innovative projects within the Interministerial Department of Public Transformation, the DITP, and I'll try and use the acronyms as we talk about this. And you are leading the debates in France for open government. And you have thought about new forms of mobilization and online participation, whether it be in France or in the United States. You worked at the town hall in Paris as first advisor to the mayor with responsibility for civil innovation, and you contributed to the launch of the participative budget for the city of Paris. So you can add on any details if I've forgotten anything from your biography, and I do apologize for the speed at which we went through that. But just so that we can get down to the nitty-gritty, I'd like to ask each of you a question for you. What form will citizenship take in the future, and what borders must be pushed away, and what must we explore to move towards citizenship of the future? So could each of you answer that question? Vanessa, it's over to you. To answer this question, I would like to start the paradox that you said to start with. In some way, the more we talk about this, the more we have participative democracy, the more we're frustrated. And I'd like to focus on the fact that it's not just because we don't want to, a lack of goodwill, or because there are problems in implementation. It's because there are two things lacking which explain how things could get better in the future, and they are a lack of what I'd call sharing administrative power and sharing financial power. And just to explain this in more detail, I'd like to talk about sharing financial power, which is slightly easier if we think of the consultation in the Citizens' Convention. We achieved proposals. They had a cost, and in the best case, there will be a budget for them. But when there's a budget, that doesn't have anything to do with thinking about financial choices and strategies, because in any public policies, there should always have a financial strategy. And if it's not put into place when the debates are taking place, then it would be put into place afterwards. And that's what explains why things happen afterwards, because things weren't necessarily included right at the beginning of the debate. And if we talk about the Citizens' Convention again, it means that we'd have to choose between different solutions, explaining the number of tons of carbon to be saved in comparison to the number of euros that are going to be spent, for example. But that is just the first level. After that, there's the second level, which is even more important, because we have to choose about huge quantities of public money which is going to be spent, and that's when there's a question of comparing the social environmental issues. So the money that's going to be used for the Citizens' Convention, does that mean that it's not going to be used for unemployment benefits, for example? And all of these things must be thought about, and citizens can be involved in how a parliamentary budget is going to be used, or things that are slightly more important, for example, at the beginning of the 5-year presidential period. And then after that, if we think of administrative power, very often we think of legislation. And when we think of legislation, it means that we are competing with national representation, parliament, etc. But public policies don't only mean that. It's also a question of implementing projects, rolling them out, and something can be done here during a period where we keep hearing people say that there is a lack of power collectively. And so they're the two things that I would imagine. So financial power and administrative power, yes, and citizenship is linked either to elections or to decision-making. And there's this idea of participation, which is linked to making decisions rather than taking action and administrative power. Thank you very much. François, would you like to also answer that question? Now, I'm a designer, so I am going to speak more at a personal level, because working with people over about 10 years in social innovation, I think it has completely updated this vision of citizens' participation in democracy, and maybe in a very romantic way, with the idealistic view of participation. First of all, because we've gone beyond just sharing decision-making. And we've seen that on the ground there is active citizenship, but active, I might go a little bit further than Vanessa, because it's active in the way in which it co-produces public actions. And so as a stakeholder, I would like to start doing things. And it's interesting to see that the terminology has changed. Shareholders led on to stakeholders. And I think that citizens are city makers, and they want to be co-producers of their own town. and of their everyday lives. And so consequently, I think that for the future, we're going to have to think about what we think about fairness in participation, because initially we think of representative democracy where everybody has a voice and they have the right to be heard. Now, that's very important, but I'm not saying that we should go against that, but it's become slightly more subtle because everyone is committed to something and everyone has got to be able to fulfill that commitment, and it's not the same as your neighbour's commitment or involvement. And so the idea is to try and keep a balance of multiple commitments, and that means that we have got to think about this, and I'm quite conscious of the fact that it's a question rather than a statement, rather than having a vision which is a bit traditional of saying, okay, we've got to have fairness, same thing for everyone and everywhere. Now that means that we've got to ask ourselves questions in the corridors of power. And in our preparation, I mentioned Else Lecomte, who is in charge of participation in Ghent, which was one of the cities that's very often been mentioned because of its actions for participative government and its success stories. And she said that the real participation isn't when citizens are interested in what the town is doing, it's the opposite. It's when the town is interested in what citizens are doing. And so when faced with a reduction in financial means, in budgets, when public authorities are paralyzed, when they're in co-working control, and by quoting Ghent, they've got to be brokers between the stakeholders. In the Nord-Pas-de-Calais region, in the north here, at the regional council, there was a process which was called ecological and social transformation of the region, which said that the public actors had to reorganize the stakeholders. And I think that that's where a lot of our roles lie. And another quotation from our Dutch neighbors, the capability of public authorities to just let go. So to realize that they mustn't just jump in to problems, they've got to learn how to listen, they've got to listen to all of the stakeholders. Now that doesn't mean, don't misunderstand me here, it's not a question of just trying to do away with the problem and hand it over to the citizens, which is what David Cameron did, for example. It's interesting, this idea of reorganizing the stakeholders, and from the people that you mentioned, there's the idea that at a given time, so today, for example, what would be desirable maybe isn't equal to the interests of all of the stakeholders, because you have to think about the environment as well. And is that something that was mentioned in the cases that you mentioned? Well, it's not called reorganization, but it depends on what we mean by stakeholders and the fact that we have enlarged them to non-humans, organizations, and I think we're a little bit too uncomfortable with this for the moment. We don't have that many examples, but the fact that they exist, the fact that they are represented, that they are around the table for discussions, and the fact that we are giving them a certain visibility, I think that that's already important, because again, I said I wasn't going to quote our Dutch friends yet, but Hamersfoort found a very interesting way of operating, because it's called a startup project. So when you start a project, everybody's got to be there around the table. That seems obvious. That seems to be a given. But it's, for example, you've got the mayor would say, no, we can't start the meeting because not everyone's here around the table. So that means, you know. Okay, thank you, François. I'm going to hand over to Clémence. Vanessa, did you want to say anything? 3 points on the fact that maybe we could go further with regards to the fact that we've got to do things. It's the power of doing things. And I could have added that it's the more people who are creating things, being productive in public policies. And that's what I meant by that second power that I called administrative power. No, I think you both agree on that. Clémence. First of all, I'd like to apologize because my connection doesn't seem to be very good, so I've had to turn off my video. I hope you can hear me, though.
Moi, ce qu'on dit Vanessa et François m'inspire.
From what I've heard from Vanessa and François, I find that very inspiring on several levels. First of all, there's the question with regards to the subjects and also the remit and competence, because when we're talking about national debates, when we're talking about town planning, and we can see with the Grand Débat in France, citizens really didn't like the fact that the government was deciding on the themes, for example, the themes that they were going to be allowed to discuss. And I think that's interesting, the way in which that then led to the Citizens' Convention for Climate Change and also for climate justice. So I think that there's a first issue there, which says that it's not necessarily up to the authorities to decide on the subject matter for citizens, but it's also up to citizens to co-build the agenda for their participation, which is never the case. It's never been the case up until today anyway. Then secondly, what you've both said with regards to the fact that people have to do things and that citizens have to be involved in projects. Obviously, that brings me back to the concept of a participative budget, for which I think success has been closely linked to the commitment of citizens, where citizens do not only give ideas or opinions, but they can also offer projects, suggest projects, invest money, actually see the results of the projects as well. And so my question, therefore, would be, is it possible to develop this type of project on a national scale? And my second question is, at what scale, on what scale would we do this? Because I think it's a shared observation, because we've seen that citizens' participation is better seen at a local level now, especially towns and metropolitan areas, not only in France but also throughout the rest of the world, are far more creative at the moment than governments are able to be in rolling out all of these schemes for citizen participation. And so what time will we be able to organize these different scales so that at a national level or even international level we'll be able to steer this? Because we can imagine that we would have a consultation amongst different metropolitan areas, talking about pollution, for example, climate change. And so how are we going to organize ourselves so that we can have this type of scheme and organization? And is it something that we would like to have anyway? Is it realistic to imagine that we would have a participative budget, participative government budget on the national level? And is it good to share all of these subjects, including citizenship? Thank you very much. Now, a summary of that first question, which has started the debate. For Vanessa, the future is a question of administrative power and financial power. François has said we've got to go from stakeholders to doers, and how the public players can reinvent their position, update their position, so that they can become more involved and make possible the multiple commitments of the inhabitants and citizens. And then Clémence has spoken to us about how we can organize more open schemes for participation. So we don't necessarily have the authorities giving the themes, because the themes are already a political subject. And so the second idea of scales, that's important as well. So do we need, and how can we change the scale of all of these innovative schemes, because they're all organized in metropolitan areas? Okay, well, thank you very much for that first round of answers. Now, as we are part of the World Design Capital Conference, tell us a little bit what design has got to do with this. We're talking about citizenship. It's more a question of political science and administrations, but it's also a subject that concerns design. And so I would like to see what you think as a designer. Thank you, Romain. So yes, what has design got to do with all of this? I'm going to try and give you some examples, because one of the characteristics of design is that it should make things visible. And I'm therefore going to try and give you a few examples that are very brief, but they will hopefully illustrate the question. Now, I think I'm going to be able to go through the slides. I just wanted to expand upon the idea of democracy. We've spoken about democracy, and we've spoken about it in the sense of how do we govern our different scales and levels of governance. But I would like to refer to democracy as was defined by John Dewey, for example. In our daily lives, do our daily lives lead to democratic behavior? And so from a design point of view, we'd call it affordance. So what is the material environment going to give us in terms of the environment, and what sort of behavior is that going to lead to? So I'll go over this very quickly, but I just wanted to show you some of the guidelines. Sorry, I apologize for my franglais. It's a little bit of an illness in the design world, which started on the other side of the Atlantic, and therefore we use a lot of English words. I'm going to go through this very quickly, and also wanted to give you some examples. So these guidelines are what designers use so that they can cover the question of how the environment and services and goods will lead to active democracy or make it weaker. Now, first of all, democracy is a conversation, and first of all, you've got to try and activate that conversation and think of products and services so that they trigger a form of exchange and dialogue, so that these discussions, in France, we like to talk about them, but we find it hard to go from talking to action. And so I don't know whether you have seen Pumpky Pump, which is a group of Swiss graphic designers that say that they can send you stickers to put on your letterbox. And on them, there's everything that you could lend people or lend your neighbors, so your drill, electrical appliances, etc. Now, you might say, wow, that's good, but it's not that easy to use because I've got to go and have a look at the letterbox. It'd be better on an application, wouldn't it? But that's what's interesting, I think. Here, I'm going to go and knock on my neighbor's door. And I'm going to talk to my neighbor, listen to my neighbor, and stand on the doorstep and have a chat. So I don't need to explain this even more. Now, we've got to make it easier to live together. Now, this is something that everybody talks about on the political stage because we need places where we can live together. We need places where we can make it easier to talk about subjects, discuss them, exchange ideas, and we've got to multiply the opportunities to live together. Now, a shared space in which there are no streets, no pavements, everybody's sharing the same space, and we've got to be careful of each other. And in Scandinavia, they've carried out experiments like this, and in Germany as well. And it causes a slowdown of traffic, which they did on purpose, and it's not controlled by electronics. And then other things that you might have seen as well. IDTGV were the first to have organized or set up Zen areas and Zap areas, where Zen you could have a rest, and Zap you would have clowns coming in who added onto the noise that was made by the children, so that it should really feel like a celebration in the train. And here you can see that there's a new way of living together. So slightly separate, though, just to make sure that each of the parties, each of the types of travelers should travel with people who were more compatible and therefore have a more enjoyable journey. Now, I don't know whether you've been and had a look at the Wikipedia page for civility. Wikipedia was one of the first contributive encyclopedias, and we had to find ways of using it. And when somebody post something on Wikipedia, somebody else will go and correct it, and very, very quickly it will be changed. And when you look at these civility pages, there are some really interesting things. First of all, the fact that we presume that people are writing good well, and the fact that you shouldn't, there's a code of conduct, and we say that people can make mistakes, that you've got to be tolerant, so that we can all live together better. And so Sorry, somebody's typing without having cut off their sound, which is why we couldn't hear you, François. I do apologize. So, promoting equality. Now, as I said earlier on, everybody is seeking equality, but we've got to do it in such a way as that services, what I call collaborative services, in which citizens can contribute to creating the services that they're going to benefit from. So there's a collaboration that I want to almost quote the Big Society project in America, where there was a real trend to put everything on the citizens' shoulders. And so we've got to try and find synergies, ways of strengthening mutually all of the stakeholders. Now, this is Cape Town. Now, this is a soup kitchen, Help to Care. It's been designed a very different way. Now, what is a soup kitchen? Well, you've got volunteers very often, and charities, social organizations that give a full service for people who are in need. This is in Cape Town, and these are people who receive their soup, but they've got to do the washing up afterwards. Now, you might think it's, just a minor action, but I think it's very interesting, because when you listen to associations and when you look at what these people don't have in their lives, they don't have the minimum things they need for living. They don't have a possibility to work. And in African philosophy, in Ubuntu, we call it the right to respond. And so you receive food, but you have the possibility to participate as well. So not necessarily by cooking, that could be another step afterwards, but at least by doing something so that you don't lose face. Now, you've all probably seen the fantastic application called Be My Eyes, which enables people who can see via their telephone to answer phone calls from people who can't see, or people who have difficulties with their sight. So if they need to read the instructions for medication or on a tin, for example, of vegetables. And when you look at the number of people who are connected in the world, depending on the language they speak, here you can see we've got a sort of, I'm not saying that we are creating a balance or fairness between people who can see and those who can't, but there's a form of solidarity in which the weight of this solidarity is highly disseminated, because it really is the responsibility of all of the thousands of people who are connected. Now, I don't want to speak for too long, so I'll go over this quite quickly. So how we can increase opening up to the outside world and diversity. Now, here we're talking about the fact that assemblies should be open. We're talking about having inclusive solutions which maintain the capacity for serendipity, so that stakeholders who were not foreseen can come and join in, and they can maintain a form of social diversity, not just eco-diversity. And also we've got to increase the heterogeneity, which is the opposite of what we're doing in design. So I could mention G1000, for example. Now, on this slide, you can see how they have tried to transpose the way in which juries are invited to a court. And here we've got 1,000 citizens in Brussels. That's where it was invented, but it's now an international platform. We've got G1000s all over the place, and they're invited to come in and work on the future of the town. And one important thing is that they're invited via a personal letter which gives them legitimacy. And that's the main difference between something that's spontaneous, where people say, oh, I don't think anyone needs me to decide on the future of the town. But if somebody invites you amongst the entire population of a town. You get a personalized invitation. Then, in general, you will go and you will attend. Now, this is a search engine that you could find on the internet, a little bit like we usually use. And this one's called Random. And it was created about 10 years ago. It doesn't exist anymore. It wasn't updated. It's a search engine that doesn't find what you're looking for. So it will find things on the periphery. So like Ecosia or Google, for example, they will find what you need. And this one will also find things that are on the sidelines. And so if you look for a book, you'll look at the book that's next door to it, you'll flick through it, you'll find things, a little bit like in a bookshop. So they've tried to find a way of giving you this heterogeneity. And I think one of the worst things about our algorithms is that they always target more and more, saying you're going to like, if you listen to jazz or you read a jazz book, then they'll only suggest jazz books afterwards. Last example, embrace complexity. Now, we find it hard to imagine that when things are complex, well, when it's complicated, then we should stop doing something. It depends on the sector, but if we talk about public authorities, and if you remember your first biology lessons when you were younger, where you were shown the complexity of cells within a leaf, and everyone says, oh, how wonderful, how amazing, how nature's complex, isn't it beautiful, etc. But when you talk about administration, then we say it's complex, and we say it's not of any use, we've got to simplify, etc. And so there are some things that can be simplified, I agree with that, but complexity has also got to be liked. We've got to learn how to love it, to live with it, because if it was simple, then it would become a little bit suspicious. And if we could improve it, if we could improve the understanding of the way in which we deal with that complexity, then we could change things. Two examples of this. Now, you've probably seen this. You've probably known Dark Patterns. It's a website where we talk about the strategies used by brands so that you're forced to click, accept newsletters, etc. And the main winner is Ryanair, or the big winner of this would be Ryanair. And so it's very patient work whereby all of the citizens try and unravel complicated systems to highlight the things that could be hidden in online marketing. Now, to come back to the question of governance, Democracy 3 is a strategy game, a strategic game, where you pretend that you're a government, that you're governing a country, and you can imagine it here. You've got the dashboard and you have to make decisions, and once you've made them, everything changes, so all of the different parts react and the minorities react, etc. And I think that the picture speaks for itself, because apart from the fact that it's very basic, the advantage of it is that it shows and it displays the complexity, the huge complexity, and it's made a game out of it. So things that people experience every day, they can now play at being confronted with that complexity, and maybe that's one of the messages. So I was supposed to have spoken for 15 minutes. I think that I managed to stick to the time that was allocated to me. So there are examples where I think the things where we've got to become more interested in the way in which we're going to design things and look at how services could be designed, or the platform or the product.
The booklet that you've seen on the screen can be downloaded from SDF site. And you can have it free of charge, of course. It's also on the website of the conference. So I'm very happy with that demonstration that shows how design gives us many positive examples, and maybe it will be interesting to examine counterexamples, but design is there to create capacity, to understand, come closer to the reality. And as part of citizenship, it creates power to act or it destroys some. And the link between power of action and citizenship, Vanessa, you've talked a lot in your last book, Le pouvoir d'agir, and citizenship is one of the 5 fields where you assess that there is a big work of transformation to start to come back to the promise of freedom and emancipation of people. Can you tell us more? Indeed, citizenship is one of the 5 fields of these new powers of action. And as I say in my book, it's important to go back to the autonomous person. And that's what I interpret as the power of action to tackle social crises, environmental crises that we experience today. A little story. That book was published just before the pandemic, and it started being disseminated a lot at the end of the lockdown. And maybe that's not at random. The pandemic, if necessary, put back on the front of the news the individual freedoms, the importance of freedom in our life, which is also fragile and complex, because it's a prerequisite to civil freedoms, but there are also social conditions, because we interdepend on each other. And we always need to understand freedom in a more pluridimensional aspect. And that's what I do in my book, highlighting the power of action that perceives an area where people act, where people recognize themselves and are recognized. What I try to say is twofold in terms of the liberty. There is first people being interdependent in recognition, and also having a say on the natural world with all that is determined and determining. And there is a margin of maneuver, margin of action in that world, instead of freedom as a free choice, which can be a little bit reducing. So, 5 dimensions: the power to act by producing, power to love, reciprocity, power to understand in contact to the world, and democracy, or the power to act in common. And in each of these dimensions, it's not only important dimensions of life, but I show to what conditions it's a power of action, why it is a political issue nowadays, what's the difficulty in our social reality, and see how that theory can bring us new public actions or new priorities. And I also show how that approach highlights new kinds of equalities. There is singularity, equality. There are different spheres, different kinds of equalities, and that leads us to challenges of equalities that are a bit different. So before coming back to the power of action and citizenship, I'd like to take 3 examples in the other spheres to show how it is structured. And there are 3 points that will give us guidelines for all the spheres, and also the one of citizenship. First sphere, the power of action by producing and through work. There is a power of action when work creates a social belonging, when you're proud to do something, when there is a know-how. And these 2 aspects are a bit of a problem due to technological transformation. Some industries collapse, others develop. And there are difficulties in terms of jobs. But even more fundamentally, there is the aspect of environmental transition that changes that positioning. Because the economic production, is it a common good? Of course it is, but it's more complicated somewhat than that. And so there is the Green New Deal that can be used as a kind of a lever, because it does not only have to do with investments, but all the components have to be put together. A guarantee of a local job, and also, and maybe more original, to create opportunities for more people to have something with productivity that's considered as an economic common good. So please remember that notion of producing common goods. A second example about the power to love and reciprocity. And here I'd like to insist on the strong links of family, friendship. And that's an action not in order to control the others, but in the development of skills, giving, receiving, giving back, and remembering. Because that aspect of memory and remembrance, without them, no action is satisfied. So it's essential, and it's not only part of private life, there are prerequisites for that private life to allow the relations to develop in a way. Of course, there will be questions on parenthood, family, but generally it will have to do with the organization of work, the organization of public spaces, to organize that time of relations that turns to two directions and is the basis of solidarity and cooperation. But it also allows that verbatim, that drafting of a common story. And one last example, that's my fourth sphere, that's knowledge. Of course, we'll have the challenges of education, and I tackle that in two different chapters. One on the essential goods, the common basis, and in the other chapter, I talk about the production of knowledge, which is specific. And that comes to the tradition of Spinoza, where I say that it's maybe the real power of action here. The fact that we can test ourselves in several professional activities as producer of knowledge. That does not mean that we'll all be researchers, but it's an experience that in some conditions will be found in education or in professional life. And that leads us to the plurality of the excellence of the spheres of experience that allow it. Of course, it will also have an impact on citizenship, a citizenship that's there to produce knowledge. Let me come back to the citizenship as a power of action, the last sphere. I told you of the financial administrative powers. I'd like to come back on the administrative power to understand things a bit better. If I take back the guidelines that we found.
D'avoir une action en vue d'un monde commun.
It has to do with an action to have a common world, to have a say on the reality, and also a symbolic meshing of know-how. And in terms of the technological transformation, it reviews all of these angles in a different way. For the first one, technological globalization, we could say that it has developed a common power of action, but it's more ambivalent in terms of individual power. And to reestablish that, we need to share the tasks. And it touches on the public sphere, sharing the task from the decision makers, the public decision makers. And in terms of the environmental transition, it goes the other way around. There are individual initiatives that thrive, as François Jegou has described. And of course, we know that there are plenty of local experiences full of creativity. And Clémence has also told us about how widespread these initiatives are. And there is the aspect of going upscale to have something that could be a group power of action.
Il y a la question de pouvoir passer à l'échelle, mais dans un moment, la raison pour laquelle j'insiste sur la transition.
And if I insist on the environmental transition, that's because I believe that's something that transforms dramatically our way of living. And as we are in a democratic state, if we want that transition to be democratic, we need to use kind of a right to take part in the creation and the implementation of low-carbon transition. Why so? Because there is the idea to produce knowledge, that's to say doing something that has an impact on reality, local energy provision, local food, and we're responsible for that. There was the idea of that soup in the street, kitchen in the street, this kind of partnership.
Entreprise partenariale entre services publics citoyens.
A partnership, a company in a way, and that's the first point. And there is another one with a common grammar. There are ways of living that are going to change and that are different from one territory to another one. The experience will be different from one place to another because the project leaders will not be the same, neither the resources or the supports. So to take in hand that long experience till 2050 and so on, there is a path to create together, to share that with a common grammar.
Merci beaucoup, Vanessa.
Thank you, Vanessa. This last point is of a high interest to me. I'm talking about the Mouvement, where there are approaches of citizenship that go pretty far in the making. And it comes back to my question to François. How can we take into account in these local initiatives, even if they associate citizens, how can we take into account global parameters, deadlines, durations that are not the usual ones that we have in daily discussions? I mean, if we had a real approach in the Mouvement about BAT, we would probably reach a result that is not in line with what's at stake. In Mouvement, for example, in terms of a drought, change of species, climate change, do you have an idea about how to introduce that? Without a denial of democracy, of course. That comes back to the question of the structuring of the different levels. With that example, I believe we could have a national frame to have something that is in line with what's at stake. If we can compare the number of carbon tons that has been avoided and development through the time limit, we need to be in line with the data, with the quantities, so that we can come closer to an ambition and be able to assess it. And to do it, we need to pull things together. It's not a denial of democracy, but there is an aspect of knowledge here. We see the time that the intergovernmental group took to share the data. So framing the objectives, measuring things, it can be national, of course. And then citizens will not invent a PAT just by clacking fingers, but say, to accomplish that, how can we invent something locally to be in line with what has been framed by a common knowledge that is much wider than the local territory? Good challenge, thank you. That's a good transition as well to Clémence. What about public stakeholders? According to your experience in Paris or the states that you work with, how can these stakeholders take in hand these approaches, these ideas? Indeed, the ideas explained by François and Vanessa are a bit disseminated, so how can it become reality? Thank you. Thank you for telling us what PAT is all about. Things are moving. Things are moving nationally. A movement is structuring itself. There is a minister in terms of citizen participation. Apparently, we are the only country with a minister in charge of citizen partnership, we also have an interministerial center for the participation of citizens. And one of their missions is to try and rationalize all initiatives that can be taken by public authorities on topics of participation. The aim is to give support to diagnosis and the support on the method, to be really demanding, namely on the project of duty of follow-up. And the idea is to follow up the ministries, to launch consultations in all directions, on all topics, to do some communication. So that's not the aim, but the aim is really to guide them, to take into account what the citizens have to say. And the method has been analyzed with some participative workshops, that's to say small citizen conferences where citizens are drawn at random to constitute a representative panel. So many things are moving, I'd say, on the content, the requirement and the expertise. I'd like to tell you now about the partnership for an open government. I think it can be a good design exercise.
L'Open Government Partnership, c'est une organisation internationale.
That's an international organization that gathers governments and the civil society. France has joined that group in 2014, and it produces an action plan every 2 years. And now we are on the step of the assessment of the action plan, and from January on, we're going to design the next action plan. It has given way to many projects that you have maybe heard about without knowing that they are part of that plan. It goes around data, transparency of algorithms, many projects of accountability to assess public services, support to decision-making, and also creative things around open science, for example. There's a project supported by the Ministry for Higher Education on that. And all these projects, I should have said it, are structured around 4 principles: accountability, citizen participation, transparency, and openness. The ambition for 2021, because I'm part of the responsibility to co-steer the action plan for 2021 to 2023, we want to integrate the topic of citizen participation in our 4 guidelines. Indeed, it's interesting to see that since the last action plan was drafted in 2017 for 2018, there has been the Grand Débat in the meantime and the climate conference. So many initiatives that we can criticize, and the Grand Débat, the main debate, was maybe done a bit too fast. It was not there to be an exercise of citizen partnership. It was there more for the sake of dialogue. And then the citizen convention that we could also criticize and be careful about. But they are large-scale initiatives with a lot of energy. There are teams of people who have worked very hard to give life to these projects. These 2 topics came in the front light of the news, and they nearly exploded the borders of the open government from 2018 and 2020. So now, what can we do? There are many organizations that ask for a citizen convention on safety, on the democratic renewal, democracy, open democracy. Is the convention a new basic initiative that will have to replicate on all topics?
Je pense qu'on peut inventer aussi d'autres.
I think we can also invent other things. I believe it's a very good initiative, but it's also interesting to train, to design projects for each topic, each background, each group of users or consumers. or citizens. For example, among the initiatives that I'd like to co-build with the civil society or with you, there is a national participative budget. I think it's an excellent challenge. Just like the Citizen Convention for Climate, there is a real challenge of tooling and design to know how it could work, who it could be dedicated to, what scope it could cover. And the initiative of co-construction of next plan also requires a lot of design. There is a meta requirement here. It has to be co-built with the citizens in full transparency by publishing everything on the internet, reporting on each decision, speech, debate with the civil society. It has to be inclusive, and inclusion is indeed one of the axes that we're going to work on. Digital inclusion, or the inclusion of some populations. In the action plans of some countries, it's sometimes dedicated to gender, the gender being then a tool of inclusion, transparency, citizen participation. I believe that's extremely interesting, and it changes from the traditional topics, as we said in the introduction. Then there is the design of the dialogue in itself with the civil society. In the past, there was the organization of open data forums, times of discussion, mixed discussions between public authorities and the civil society on several topics. What can it be like? Can we make things bigger, more open? Should it be more targeted? If I tell you all that, that's not to tell you my life, but it's to tell you that there are initiatives that are really open, and I'm really waiting for ideas, propositions, participations. There is a very strong challenge to have that initiative being a co-construction, and everybody is welcome. And the last aspect that is interesting by design, as Vanessa has talked about, that's the assessment. And that's part of the strong standards of that project. And we are drafting here the assessment plan. Everything is analyzed in many details, in full transparency. And according to me, the expertise of the design of the public action is is giving an added value. Designing projects as tests, experimentations that are then assessed. And as we talk about design, that's really a concrete added value, something really significant in terms of the traditional expertise of the local democracy.
And it's back to you. So for you, Clémence, maybe an additional question. I don't know whether the answer is going to be that easy. So we could participate in the previous plan, and there's a real disconnection between what we perceive as a sort of thirst for participation, because it's available in all sorts of forms, which then flow down at a local level, and then the previous plan. How can we try and bring together the aspirations of people who would like to participate? So all of the citizens who would like to participate in this type of action, and then we've got to see how we can reach out to other people, and the institutional schemes which are designed in offices by the administrations. And so there's a question with regards to design, but be a little bit more precise. How can we interest people? What would the magic recipe be? How can we enable people to think that it's worth participating in this type of process? Unfortunately, I don't have a magic recipe for that, and I'd even say that it's even more complicated than we would imagine. And I'm thinking about another experience that we had in Paris when we launched the 500 million euro budget, there was the fear of some elected members and some of the administrations to, you know, have to fight off all of the citizens that would come running to the town hall door. But even with a very ambitious project, with a lot of people committed on, with a lot of people around the table talking about politics in a very committed way, participation does not come on its own. And it really is a very demanding process when you want to bring people on board, and that's quite normal. But I don't have a magic recipe. I think that the minimum requirement would be that you have to have very strong commitments. You have to be very explicit in the commitments that you are trying to achieve and what you are trying to do after the scheme involving participation. And also it's got to be a full cycle. I think that in terms of the participative budget, because that's the subject that I know the best, I think that it started to really work once people started to observe the projects, with projects that were decided on by the Parisians themselves, and where on the internet we were proving what we'd done. We were accountable, so we were showing that the projects that had really been concluded. So that's good for a scheme like this. But if we continue to organize participation schemes that are disappointing and frustrating, that it's going to be very difficult to bring other people on board afterwards. And we've had the problem with the Open Government Plan, which is a technical subject, international subject, quite abstract as well to people. And so the challenge is to show how, in reality, there is a huge window for opportunity so that the state can make commitments
vraiment court sur notre vie quotidienne.
And that can have an impact on our daily lives. So we're talking about the transparency of algorithms, and it's a very powerful subject. And in the OGP, there's the idea of civil society as well, and the participation of citizens, which are two complicated things as well, and they don't always necessarily go very well together. Vanessa, did you want to say something? Ah, Vanessa's forgotten to put her microphone on.
Ah, là, vous m'entendez?
Ça y est, oui.
Peut-être deux choses, c'est-à-dire oui.
Two things. So yes, of course, there's the question of where it would lead to. Mustn't be frustrating, and it must lead to something. And again, it's the way in which it's designed. And so that's earlier on why I was talking about the right to co-design the trajectory, because you can't be involved in all decisions, but for some decisions, the idea that the way in which we're going to be investing public money and commit to major objectives that are going to be public, and that should be the aim of the Citizens Association. And it's a way of building towards something. So that's the first point. But the other point that I wanted to draw your attention to is slightly different, because I think that
La liberté moderne, elle s'est construite.
modern freedom was built when we decided that we had a government that could deal with things in the cities and not really worry about people's private lives. And we mustn't forget that that's important. There are a lot of people who are going to be involved in their private lives, professional lives, who are going to be in sports clubs. They're going to look after their elderly parents, and so they're very committed, but they're not committed in the sense of citizens' participation. And so it's a question of the time that remains, the free time that people have so that they can be more involved. First of all, I think it's important to not compare all of these different commitments, because there's the power to act, but in different spheres. But if it's important that more and more people, because it involves a lot of people, because we're talking about democracy, and it mustn't always be the same people who are involved in a participative process. And so we have to find free time and maybe find more money so that people can participate. What I mean is it could be in terms of labor law, so that we can give people more time so that they can participate in demanding projects, because it will require time over a year in a recurrent manner. So it's a question of time, and how can that fit into people who work, into their lives, and maybe money as well, because we know that it's a period where there's a lot of social fragility, and so we could maybe think that there is a form of payment. So maybe for people who work part-time, it could be an additional salary, and there could be a limit, a little bit like when you have sports clubs and where people are given a compensation. And so we could imagine that if people want to participate, there would be a fixed amount which would recognize the time that those people are going to have to spend on the project, and it compensates for that, and it could be useful for people who work less, maybe.
Je pose pour rebondir aussi, il y avait une question. J'ai de l'écho, non? Ouais, ça y est, c'est fini. Une question de quelqu'un.
Question from somebody who is participating today with regards to how we can guarantee that the efforts that we make so that we can reinforce and increase citizens' participation concerns everyone. And so, for example, people who seem quite distant from those schemes, you've just mentioned two possibilities, the question of time and with labour law, and the question of money. François and Clémence, do you have any ideas about that as well? Would you call it representativeness or equality? How will you go out there and try and find people to participate? Now, if I can add on to a couple of points just to answer the question, I think that
elle est bien dans la formulation que tu viens de donner.
It's the answers in the way in which you ask the question, because we've got to stop with this fisherman's syndrome where we sit there with a hook and line, waiting. We're an appetizing bait, hoping that people are going to come along and take a bite. And so it's a bit like Else Lecomte said, you've got to go out there and try and find people. You've got to go and see where people are doing things. And yet again,
je suis plutôt d'accord avec
I agree with everything that Clémence said earlier on, but I would just say that we should be careful. When we say that we've got to design systems and schemes, design mustn't become another way of creating a framework. I'm a little bit allergic to the word framework. Maybe we don't use it in the same way, Clémence, but I think we find it very difficult in our countries. Maybe I can say it as someone who looks at different forms of governance throughout Europe via the URBACT project, and so I can see how things happen in other towns and cities. And it says, you know, design, create what you live or what you've experienced. And there's a type of reflex in France, as Clémence said, with regards to the participative budget, where we find it very hard to let go. We find it very hard to trust. And maybe we don't have to think things ahead. We don't have to think ahead. Maybe we can just give ourselves time to be surprised by what happens. And so maybe I would like to talk about what you called design, Clémence. Maybe we could take this from a different angle, though. Maybe we don't need a system. Maybe we need several systems. And if we want to have both the elderly who've got time, but who aren't necessarily very committed to using digital resources, there'll be young people who'll do the exact opposite. And so we'll find ourselves with a diversity of different schemes. And I think it's inspiring to say that we'll just let go and we'll go towards people, we'll reach out to them, and we'll try and give people different channels, so multi-channel strategies, where we won't have a national commitment, where we'll try and change the figures for the number of people who vote at the elections, etc. No, but on the other hand, if we really do try and do this differently, so in the way in which we assess his participation, if we have an Excel spreadsheet where we count the number of people who participate and the time they participated, but then if we assess it by collecting the open effects of things and the open impacts of what has been done, and what is the total sum of all of the forms of participation that people have contributed to, then I think that would be far more encouraging rather than just looking at things via one specific scheme, and especially because in France, maybe we're too creative and we start
tous les ans, tous les 2 ans, etc.
New schemes every year, every 2 years. And Daniel Termont, the former mayor of Ghent, said, well, whenever we organise something that's participative, the room is never big enough for us to host all of the people. We've always got more people than the size of the room. And so for 25 years now, we've continued to work in a way that's not necessarily innovative participative government, but it's created trust. And as far as representativeness is concerned, I know that it's something you've worked on in Paris. I think that after several years, it's always the same ones that seem to come back, isn't it, in terms of representation, representativeness. Yes, I agree with François, and it's true that it's a problem with the language, the vocabulary that we're using, but that's why we, can't design without designers. And if I design, then it's going to be a pure framework, and that's why I think that we really have to get ourselves surrounded with the right people so that we can do things better. In terms of aller vers, go green, I don't know.
Et c'est aussi, effectivement, plutôt que de créer des fenêtres.
Whether rather than just creating windows with questions, maybe there's another way of inspiring design, even if it's just ethnography, because we can try and go and live in a place and so that we can describe the world that is around us, look at the vocabulary, look at the cartography mapping, etc. And there are various tools that can help us with regards to citizens' participation in a far broader way, maybe. As far as this aller vers question is concerned, we did test a lot of things in Paris, especially in the lower income areas, and where we changed the rules and we laid down quotas for projects which came from and were for these neighborhoods. There were tools as well. Some of the tools were actually human beings, a bit like the ambassadors for the participative budget, and these were people who were trained so that they could start discussions with people, go out, meet people in the streets. But there were other tools as well that were like what we called cyclo-cargos, almost like trailers, delivery tricycles,
avoir des urnes mobiles,
so that we could have mobile days where people traveled around, going into blocks of flats, traveling around. So the idea was to move away from the town halls. But all of that was repeated year after year, but each time we adjusted it, we analyzed the results of the votes. And it was a bit counterintuitive, but sometimes the votes that had the most participants, were those that were held by the elected members, whereas the types of population that participated, you have to look at what we're comparing them with. Now, maybe it's always the same people, and I haven't monitored this for a long time, so I don't know if it is still always the same people, because every year it seems to be more and more people, so it can't always be exactly the same people. But in any case, if we compare it to the population that participated before 2014 to the various schemes for participation, then I think there has been a complete renewal. And we knew this when we looked at the different areas and the age of the people who were participating, because from the first year onwards, I think we had an average age of just under 30 years, which was quite clearly within our objectives, and it was a huge jump forward in comparison to the traditional type of age group for participation, which was much older. Clémence, you mentioned designers in many ways. You said that they would be able to design new schemes for OGP. Maybe they should find new ways of creating frameworks for participation. Again, we are in Lille here for the World Design Capital. Vanessa, I don't know your experience with design, but intuitively, or just maybe from the work you've carried out, what skills, tools, competencies would you like to see or have, or what would you like to work on with designers so that you can either implement or maybe just move forward in terms of what you'd like to suggest or that you have thought of? Microphone, Vanessa, sorry. Yes.
C'est mon réseau qui... J'ai envie de repartir de la notion d'espace public.
I'd like to come back to this idea of a public space that François started to talk about earlier on. Now, the public space in democratic terms is also an area where people can hold democratic debates. And maybe I'd like to come back to other people and maybe not be completely in agreement with what you said, because there's this idea of
au-delà de la conversation, c'est
appearance, because there are areas where
les uns aux autres, cette notion de s'apparaître, elle me paraît très
this idea of bringing people on board, because it's so important. That's the first point. It's not just a debate. Earlier on, you were talking about the pluralization of functions as well. Now, there's one thing, or the pluralism of functions. There's something that I move on to in a different way. I think there's a conflict of use in public spaces as well, because if you take Parisian pavements or streets, and if you look at scooters, bicycles, pedestrians, there are people all over the place. Now, you present it as being a sort of fertile chaos. But there's another way of seeing this, because I think there's a conflict of use, and if you can pacify that, I think it should be one of the virtues of design, because in democracy, if we try and link this into democratic research, we're also looking at conflicts, but we're not trying to just suffocate them. The idea is to try and come to a consensus. And so complexity is interesting, but to show how we can create something, and maybe if we can see that not everything involves sharing, because I think that modernity has shown that we have the right to a private life, and although working as a group is very important, it's important to have a private life as well. The two of them have to coexist. And so I think that this classification is the fact that not everything should be shared, but I was just thinking about those Parisian streets and pavements, and that old people could find it difficult to become part of that type of new lifestyle. And that's one of the challenges of mobility, maybe. And it could be reassuring, but a danger at the same time. And so they were the two things that I thought of. And then also conversations, social conversations. Maybe I can focus on this. You were talking about, we called those third spaces that you mentioned earlier on. Because, not because they're complex or different, but because they bring in third parties. And I think it's interesting to see things differently. So you're between schools and businesses. These third places are very interesting. And one last point as well, just with regards to the framework that you mentioned earlier on. Have I got a minute? Otherwise, I'll say it later on. Yes, in terms of the framework, I think that we didn't necessarily understand it in the same way. When I looked at framework, the fact that we have to bring together these conflicts of use, obviously there will be things that we'll be able to create in common. And so what I would say as a scientific request in the examples that I've seen, for some things that could be quantified, so I was talking about decarbonization, for example, some things are scientific, and that's one of the pillars of democracy. And so it's not just a question of having good ideas. Those good ideas have also got to mean something. They've got to have a purpose. Sometimes you can measure them. Sometimes there's no specific knowledge, but sometimes there is. And that has got to set the framework for the work so that you can use something real when you're imagining something new. And the problem will be real, and you won't be heading off in the wrong direction or onto things that aren't the real problem. So not a framework to say this is how we're going to do things and plan everything, but a framework in terms of science and objectives based on facts. Now, maybe before I hand back to you, François, Clémence, would you like to add on to that shopping list for the designers? And I'd just like to remind everyone that you can ask your questions via the chat if you so wish, and we'll be taking some time at the end so that we can share those questions. So good luck, François, because that shopping list is getting pretty long. Now, this is a conversation that we had during the week with the MEL Lab, which is part of the Lille World Design Capital project. Now, design, which is so full of hype, mustn't necessarily just replace the aging schemes by new designer schemes, which aren't necessarily equivalent or better. And I don't think it's ever a bad idea to add a little dose of design. They're always the best workshops with the best share of speaking time, etc., the best possibility of creating a prototype, etc. But at the same time, we're not talking about the same objects or subjects. And if François would like to come back to that idea of about participants, I think that there's a risk of replacing what could be a debate of ideas and expressing opinions, of needs, and to replace that but with POCs and designers and analyzing projects. And then another inspiration that I really like with regards to design is speculative design, fiction design. And as we're talking about citizens and the future, I don't know whether François would like to take the bait here, but I think that we could really count on designers so that they can invent and reinvent and design citizenship in the future. And maybe question people and imagine new things. François, over to you.
François, la parole est à toi.
François, the floor is yours. Oh, thank you for that shopping list. Now, it's really stimulating. Now, I've written a lot of things. I'm going to try and go through them very quickly. Maybe come back to something that was mentioned with regards to the level of governance. Clémence, you were asking for participation that should be organized on a national level. And I'd also like to say, because it's not often the case, that the European Commission has started making progress on this in the last H20 meetings and research meetings, where they're working on how they can give citizens the vote when talking about European scientific policy. So how can we have a citizens' deliberation that would be possible in monetary terms as well, affordable over time? Now, it's not often that we hear this type of thing, or that we're able to talk about the Commission, which is able to reach out to citizens and listen to them. So I think we should be very pleased about that and encourage them. Then I wanted to say several things on the points that you mentioned, for example.
Alors, sur ces questions de est-ce qu'il faut...
So for the questions whereby you're asking whether we should
sur les questions des conflits d'usage que Vanessa
decide on the conflicts of use that Vanessa mentioned. Do you think we should open up, or do you think we should try and pacify? Now, I think that here, the cities, the towns, the countries that have a long culture of participation and history of it have said that there are customs that or habits that have to be cultivated, because when you are so used to giving precise rights and obligations and duties to each class of citizens, if you think about our forests, our parks, before we used to have forest pathways, we used to have hiking paths, we used to have horse tracks. Now we've got them for bikers because everything has to be classified. And so we're in a culture which requires itself to decide on laws or rights. And so it says, I have the right to run over a walker if they're in front of my mountain bike, even if I'm riding at 45 kilometers per hour in the forest. So from time to time, you have to organize things, of course you do, but you've also got to try and reverse the trend. And I'd like to come back to the question, thank you very much, Vanessa, about the way in which we can redefine a framework. I always use the word and it brings me out in a rash. I like people and I like it when things start with people. Now, we do need a framework, but let's not jump the gun. Let's not try and go too quickly. Let's just wait. Let's try and be surprised by the fact that things can happen, things that we hadn't expected from citizens. And has this framework got to come in first? We have a tendency in our country to say yes, but before we let ourselves be taken over by all of this, then, let things happen. And then after that, we will reframe everything afterwards. Now,
alors je prends tout à fait le petit scu de
I saw Clémence sending me out that firing that missile at me, saying it's not sufficient just to send out POCs for something to work. Now, we've been working on the collaborative town POC for 2 years now, and I've been meeting all of these proof of concepts that I find very positive. I think the overall approach is very positive, but we're not here to replace democracy, but it's part of John Dewey's that I spoke about earlier on, because maybe good news that I could feed back to you with regards to the 120 POCs that we have at the moment.
Okay. Pardon, François, je ne crois pas que POC ait été déplié.
I don't know whether we mentioned it earlier on. So POC is an acronym for proof of concept. It's a form of utopia whereby we try and prove the concept when the idea that we have had is confronted with reality, and design will work on the project and its specific phase whereby we use all sorts of techniques and we try and compare the idea at the lowest cost possible to the real situation to see whether it's a good idea or not, whether it's got potential, whether it could be improved, or whether it's just a bad idea. And so all of the applications for Lille well-designed capital was based on the fact that we have to ask local authorities, companies, citizens, etc., to bring in projects that use this approach, and at a time where we're able to compare the design with use. Now, I don't know how this will work after a year where we've had to face the difficulties caused by COVID, but I think that virtually all of the projects that we have hosted in the Maison Ville Collaborative, so the Collaborative Town Centre, have understood that you can't have a project on your own, you've got to do it with others in a group. And you involve stakeholders. Now, I'd just like to give you a free advert here. The catalogue of this collaborative city gives an analysis of all of these points of acupuncture that these projects represent throughout the territory. And these 120 projects have led to 15 trends for the collaborative city of the future and the way in which a city can collaborate. Now, again, Clémence, I fully agree with you. This does not replace questions linked to democracy, but when you are looking at questions of democracy and when you've got that fertile present, because at all levels of our daily life and the way in which we have projects, the way in which we organize our society, we have a form of collaboration and working together which emerges and which creates a space that's more comfortable for collaboration. I think that that's interesting. And so I'd invite you to dive into this document. It's available in French and English. It's on the website for the collaborative town or city, and it talks about the 15 trends that have come out of the different territories. And then the last point with regards to speculative design. Yes, of course, we've got to maybe remind you what we mean by speculative design. The idea is to say that design isn't only there for projects and for services that we're going to be implementing, but we'll have projects and services a little bit like, how can I compare it? It's a bit difficult, but maybe you're used to seeing concept cars. So concept cars are the cars that a brand will bring to market, not with the idea of producing them a day. So very often they're cars which have been produced, but they're just there to make the market react. And so speculative design is design that creates objects, services, products that display them, like designers do so well, as if they were there, as if they were real, as if they were true, but without producing them, without actually putting them to market, and therefore making them objects of discussion or subjects of discussion. And so I agree with Clémence, because it really, if I give you an example, with the CGDT and the CFPT, we worked on redesigning a certain number of public figures. So, for example, what would the new mobile prefect be like in the future? And the idea was to go and build almost provocative visions so that reality could become a project, and that would enable us to move forward.
I'm far from having answered to all questions, but it was long anyway. So 4 questions, I think, from participants. Clémence, Vanessa, François, can you please write them down and select the one you want to answer to? What about the promise of participative democracy? Is it the only horizon of citizenship? What can we conclude in terms of citizenship from the examples as Notre-Dame-des-Landes, Europa City?
Est-ce que la démocratie représentative va disparaître?
Is representative democracy going to disappear?
Après votre intervention, Vanessa, sur...
And there was a question after your presentation, Vanessa. How can we invest means, also financial, to promote engagement? Isn't it kind of a bias because being paid by an authority, we would tend to agree with the authority? So it's linked to money and citizenship. Maybe 5-6 minutes each maximum to answer to one of the questions. Vanessa, maybe that financial question and then representation. On the financial issue,
Moi, il me semble que ça serait plutôt une manière de...
I believe it would be rather a way of reviewing the universal income. We could imagine an income of participation
accordé de manière systématique dès lors qu'on...
that would be given systematically if people take part. So there would not be the fact that you need to agree with what is required from you. So we're not going to restart the debate, of course. And the other aspect is participative democracy. Indeed, I think that representative democracy remains extremely important, and I hope that it's not going to disappear. Otherwise, we can fear a democratic tyranny, and all that is complementary to representation, and it does not replace it. There comes the interest of working on fields that are not in competition but that are different. François, can you go second and leave the end for Clémence? I completely agree with Vanessa. on that complementarity, and I insist on the difficulty that we often face to imagine complementary scenarios instead of exclusive ones, to enrich the complexity of the processes instead of trying to oppose them. In our countries, we like to discuss, know who is right. And the other part, I've experienced many situations in research and action around that concept of participation and the income to receive, if it's in the evenings or at the weekends.
On n'avait absolument aucune forme de rémunération. Alors je pense qu'on a aussi un réflexe de romantisme.
I think that we have a romantic reflex of the ideal of involvement in France, where for an involvement to be pure, it needs to be entirely unpaid and volunteer.
On obtient souvent une
On the one side,
participation, c'est-à-dire qu'on se contente d'avoir 3 retraités
we are happy with having 3 retired persons in a group, even in towns like Agen, one of the current leaders of an URBACT project, Active Citizen, where the neighborhood councils gather people.
Et alors, ici, je trouve que vraiment, il y a une... comment dirais-je il faut trouver un petit
And I believe we have to find a balance.
le secteur privé qui
When you have the private sector organizing discussion groups, you give some money to the people for the time that they've spent. That's not for that reason that they become professionals that are that work on behalf of the authority. Then, in terms of the third places,
comment dirais-je dans la droite ligne
in the same line as an article by Alain Damasio, the science fiction author, something that he published during lockdown. All these places are places of experimentation, and maybe we don't analyze them enough. They are places where we test new kinds of governance at a small scale, in a co-working space, an alternative one. And we consider them as places of alternative contestation, not a place of experimentation. I think we have to change our view on them. They are places of inspiration. They are inspiring. For the shopping list that we had mentioned earlier on. Clémence?
Sur argent et citoyenneté, je sais pas
on money and citizenship, I don't know if you have all read the comments.
Super intéressant, le compte engagement citoyen.
But there is the compte engagement citoyen. I did not know about that. But that reminded me
la carte citoyenne à Paris.
Of the citizenship card in Paris. That's an initiative that aimed at making citizens loyal, citizens who engage themselves on a regular basis, and in return, they don't receive money, but they receive tickets for fireworks, for visits, and also there's an initiative of citizen education. So there are already things that have been tested along that line. And I'd like to add that the Center of Citizen Participation, when organizing workshops with representative panels, they give some money to the citizens along that logic that otherwise they would not have mothers 3 days in Paris. It's not a wage, it's simply a reimbursement of costs. And like that, it's pretty logical. And the aim is not only to have people from Paris, but from elsewhere.
Non, c'est assez culpabilisant.
And then,
de ce point de vue-là, on a traité la question de la disserte très partiellement.
About another topic, we are practitioners, we are professionals, creators of participative approaches, but there certainly are other axes that we could innovate on. Maybe the Réserve civique. We work with the DITP, with them since the lockdown. There are many initiatives to commit, but how can we structure all that in a long-lasting initiative? There is also the aspect of education to citizenship and civility, and that goes back to the management of the public space and the fact that the public bodies cannot do all. What's the role of citizens to manage scooters and so on?
Il y a aussi quand même un questionnement plus fondamental.
And we can also wonder about what it is to be a citizen.
Et enfin, il y a la question de qui.
Then there is the who, and on the future of citizenship, we could also have pushed the discussion forward on other fields and wonder if we would open that citizenship. And there was a debate at the Assembly last week about the voting right at 16. You can just imagine how much it could change the democratic debate to have young people aged 16 to vote.
Participer à tous ces dispositifs participatifs des personnes sans papier.
Could we also have illegal people take part in that? So we could open the field of citizenship much wider. It has only been explored by an excellent work on the digital identity of the future, identification of the future. That's also a controversial topic of the way we identify citizens and the services to citizens. Thank you for that advertising page. Are there still questions? Questions from participants? Leo, do you want to tell us about the questions of the Slido? Indeed, they are now on the screen. First question, tomorrow, how would you feel really a citizen? We had 3 answers. So I'm just discovering them.
De les lire toutes et toutes et puis
take the time to read them.
Une fois que voilà ce sera passé, je passerai à.
Once you have read them, I'll turn to the others. Yes, there is a topic of the digital physical identity that Clémence has mentioned, the time that Vanessa had tackled, and citizenship, which is not only in the hands of political bodies. That's pretty coherent with what we've said. François, Clémence, and Vanessa, do you want to react?
Non, on va passer à la suivante.
Super.
Okay, next one. Second question. When did you have the feeling to implement, to use your citizenship for the last time? Can you tell us briefly about that experience? It's interesting because they are really different aspects of citizenship. Maybe I can say something here. When we had organized the debate, we had focused on participative democracy rather. And what Clémence has said is really right. We've only tackled one part of citizenship. Of course, with the drama just before our debate, that's one intervention, but there are many other things in citizenship, traditional ones, starting with the common frame. Yes, we go back to the aspect of frame, which is a challenge for our society. It has to be there, it has to be respected and supported. It's a Republican value. But I think that was not the core of today's value, but it's central in citizenship, of course. Thank you. A third question, Léo? Yes.
Alors, c'était celle-ci. Avez-vous déjà participé à une démarche de démocratie?
Have you already taken part in an initiative of participative democracy? Once again, long answers. And we have received 3 nice answers. So, first one, member for Participative Council, telling us about the obstacles to overcome, to be an advisor in Grenoble, for example. There is a time, shyness issues, skills that we believe are necessary to have. That's interesting. Second, it's about somebody who is really engaged.
Ouais, là encore, la question du temps de ces processus-là, c'est vrai qu'on...
And once again, there is the aspect of time. We haven't talked much about it, but the time that we can dedicate to the issue.
De ces exercices de citoyenneté.
Time necessary to free for the citizenship. It's not only evenings. So thank you for answering to these questions. Many thanks, Vanessa, Clémence, and François. I was really interested in the discussion. Maybe I write down something on that and try structure what you've said at the end, Clémence. There is an article, autrement.com, and I leave the floor to Chloé because the week is not over and she can tell us about the next conferences.